Syrian security forces attacked this mosque as well, and the patients and doctors there also lost their lives. Now, Muawiyah wrote this on the wall, but he had no idea what was going to happen because of this one mistake. Later, the Syrian government used chemical weapons. Forget about your children and have more children. And if you can't, leave the women of your homes here. Bodies were laid out in lines. Children and women all lost their lives in a line. Their people started fleeing Syria, and when they couldn't find a flight, they risked their lives to escape by sea. 14-year-old Muawiyah could never have imagined in his wildest dreams that a small line written on a wall would lead to so much. The world's superpowers, the US, Russia, Iran, even terrorist organizations like ISIS stood face to face. Look, this is Syria, located to the west of India, and within Syria, 74% of the population is Sunni Muslim, and 16% of the population here is Shia Muslim. So the point is that the Sunni population is in the majority. But despite being in the majority, the government in Syria is led by Bashar al-Assad, who is a Shia Muslim. And within his party, the important positions are also held by Shia Muslims. So the first question is, why did this happen? In the year 1970, the current president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad, had a strong hold within the Syrian military. He also headed the Syrian Air Force. On November 13, 1970, he carried out a coup and declared himself the president of Syria. Now, he became the president, but he was well aware that the majority in Syria was the Sunni population. Sooner or later, a Sunni-led political party could come to power. So, from the moment he became president, he started to strengthen his power. He paid a lot of attention to the Sunni majority areas in Syria. He also deployed intelligence agencies to keep an eye on even the smallest issues and to ensure that no issue arose where Sunni-led political parties could establish their dominance. He used his power to create rules that completely eliminated the opposition. He changed the constitution to suit his needs. He extensively used secret agencies and the military. He controlled the media and everything else according to his will, and he kept the power completely in his hands. And not only that, there have been allegations from time to time that he favored the Shia population in Syria. Now, the year 2000 arrives, and in this year, Hafez al-Assad passes away. After his death, his son, who is still the president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, becomes the president. And when he became president, nothing changed. He continued his father's policies. Now, the authoritarian rule created some resentment among the Sunni population in Syria. But despite all these things, Bashar al-Assad did not face much difficulty in ruling Syria. Now, what happens next is that the year 2006 arrives, and from 2006 to 2010, due to less rainfall in Syria, a drought occurs, and people were already troubled by the dictatorship along with this. The people of Syria started facing economic difficulties. People had very little money. Food scarcity began, so the point is that the people of Syria, who were troubled by the dictatorship, started getting troubled by the lack of money and employment as well. Poverty had increased significantly in Syria now. When all this was happening in Syria, another thing was happening alongside the neighboring countries of Syria, where there was dictatorship like Tunisia, Yemen, Jordan. The Arab Spring was happening there, meaning that the common people were protesting against the dictators in these countries, demanding the removal of dictatorship and the holding of elections. Basically, they were demanding democracy or freedom instead of dictatorship, and these protests in these countries were not normal protests. They had a huge impact on the Arab countries, because of which all the dictators were very scared. Like in Libya, Gaddafi was killed, and elections were held. The dictator ruling Tunisia, Ben Ali, also had to flee the country. In Egypt, Hosni Mubarak, who had been ruling for 30 years, also had to leave his seat, even though they tried very hard to stop the protesters by bringing military tanks onto the roads. But even after that, they couldn't stop them. People were gathering and protesting in various places in this way. On top of that, rising food prices and economic instability in the region made the dictators even more fearful now. All these things happening in the neighboring countries of Syria. This news also reached inside Syria through radio, TV, and newspapers. These things reached the people, and social media played a very important role in this, which will come up later. But before that, let me tell you one thing. that in today's date, social media has become a very important part of all our lives. It has its advantages, but it also has some disadvantages that impact productivity a lot. And in the case of students, it affects even more negatively so how social media uses your data to make you addicted. I have made a separate video on this, which you will get completely free on the Unacademy platform on July 28th at 5 p.m. as a part of the Unacademy UPSC Summit. And if you are also a UPSC aspirant, you must attend this summit where the nation's best minds will help you around how to prepare for UPSC. That too completely free with zero charges in this summit. You can attend a live online session by Nitin Gadkari and Unacademy's top UPSC educators who have experience guiding more than 1,000 successful UPSC candidates. This Unacademy online summit will be live on the Unacademy app on July 28th and 29th from 4 p.m. And I will meet you on July 28th at 5 p.m. So let's get back to the topic now. People in Syria were already troubled by the dictatorship. Secondly, poverty and hunger were also increasing significantly so. Bashar al-Assad was also afraid that what was happening in other countries might start happening in Syria. So Bashar al-Assad had already put all his security on alert to deal with this, that even the smallest thing should not be ignored. And these protests happening in neighboring countries should not start in Syria, but Bashar al-Assad had no idea that what he was thinking would turn out to be the exact opposite. So it was February 2011, and in the south of Syria, there is a place called Daraa. There was a school here, not far from a mosque. In this school, there was a 14-year-old boy in the 7th grade named Muawiyah. Remember this name, Muawiyah? You will be surprised to know that due to an incident involving this 14-year-old boy, Syria has been embroiled in one of the most complicated civil wars for the past 10 to 12 years. Superpowers like the US, Russia, Iran, and even terrorist organizations like ISIS have come face to face. So what did this boy do? Let's discuss that. Actually, it was February 26, 2011, and Muawiyah, along with 14 other students, was hearing about the protests against dictatorship in neighboring countries through news and radio. On the same day, Muawiyah wrote on his school wall in Arabic, "It's your turn, doctor." This is the original picture of that wall. Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, had studied at the Western Eye Hospital in London, so people also called him Doctor. Muawiyah wrote this on the wall, but he had no idea what consequences this mistake would bring. That same day, when Muawiyah reached home in the evening, he told his father about it. His father was very scared, knowing that the government would give a severe punishment for this. In fact, he even told Muawiyah to hide. But it was too late. Many people had already seen the wall, and the security chief of the Daraa area, who was a relative of Bashar al-Assad, Atif Najib, had also heard about it and was very angry. He knew very well that revolts against dictatorship were happening in neighboring countries, so ignoring such an act would not be right for him. The next day, February 27, 2011, security forces came near the school and started investigating who wrote it, but no one told them who wrote it. When they got tired of asking, they took away 15 children, including Muawiyah, around 4 p.m. After taking them away, the Syrian security forces tortured these children severely. They hung them upside down, pulled out their nails, and electrocuted them with water, leaving them almost dead. Meanwhile, Muawiyah and the other children's parents had gone to the police 2 or 3 times to get their children released. But the forces not only refused to release them, but also told the parents to forget about their children and have more children. If they couldn't, they should leave the women of their homes there. Hearing this, people got very angry and started protesting in Daraa, demanding the release of their children. These protests were peaceful because if anyone protested by gathering a large crowd and causing damage, the government would not spare. So they were protesting very peacefully, demanding the release of the children. But even then, the police forces wanted to set an example, so they did not release the children. Instead, they arrested many of the protesters and put them in jail. The news of the protests in Daraa and what was happening to the children started reaching other cities in Syria. People began to learn about what was happening in Daraa, and protests started in other places as well. By March 15, 2011, areas like Damascus, Aleppo, Homs, Latakia and Hama were also witnessing protests against the government demanding the release of the children. What started as a small protest in the small area of Daraa spread to different parts of Syria. This was the time when Bashar al-Assad's regime began to realize that capturing these children was not the right decision, as it could make things worse. As the initial protests gained momentum, they began to spread rapidly across the country. From small towns to bustling cities, the movement resonated with people from all walks of life. Each day, more individuals took to the streets, driven by a shared sense of urgency and a desire for change. The spirit of unity and determination was palpable as communities came together to voice their demands. It was a powerful reminder that when united, people could indeed make their voices heard and push for a better future. In the wake of escalating violence, a faction of the Syrian military defected. These defectors banded together to form the Free Syrian Army, or FSA. Their goal was to overthrow the Assad regime and establish a democratic government. The FSA quickly became one of the main opposition groups, gaining support from various international actors. However, internal divisions and lack of consistent support posed significant challenges. As the conflict intensified, external powers began to play a more significant role. Countries like the United States, Russia, Iran, and Turkey became deeply involved, each pursuing their own interests. The United States and its allies provided support to certain rebel groups, while Russia and Iran backed the Assad regime. Turkey, on the other hand, focused on countering Kurdish forces along its border. This external involvement further complicated the situation, turning Syria into a battleground for regional and global power struggles. The use of chemical weapons in the conflict marked a grim turning point. Reports of chemical attacks shocked the international community, leading to widespread condemnation. The United Nations conducted investigations confirming the use of banned substances. In response, the United States launched airstrikes against Syrian military targets. Despite international efforts to eliminate Syria's chemical weapons stockpile, allegations of their use continued to surface, highlighting the ongoing humanitarian crisis. The Syrian conflict has left an indelible mark on the region and the world. Millions have been displaced and countless lives have been lost. The war has reshaped alliances, altered geopolitical dynamics, and raised questions about the international community's ability to respond to such crises. As the world continues to grapple with the aftermath, the stories of those affected by the conflict serve as a somber reminder of the human cost of war.